Good morning, everyone. I'm David Allen. I'm an author and business coach and actually a small business owner myself. And I spent 30 years really studying and researching what are the best practices for those of us in this professional world that sometimes get overwhelmed and confused and lose our focus. How do we get back on in case we get off? And on behalf of ZionsBank, they've asked me to show up and share some of what I've learned over all these years as valuable information for you folks. So on behalf of ZionsBankBlog.com and ZionsBank, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. As an owner of a small business, you must probably know that it can get crazy pretty fast, and that many times we tend to lose our focus and somehow lose a sense of control that we might want to maintain so that we can be successful and move forward in a positive way with as little stress as possible. So I'm going to cover some things about this. Some of the key elements I think that are critical for small businesses and actually for anyone and certainly for any professional is how do you stay focused and in control, especially in a world today that's moving so fast, that has so much potentially meaningful input coming to us that we've let in that we may need to take care of, see about, and be accountable for. How do we get organized about all that? How do you set priorities? How do you keep the right focus at the right time? Basically, how do you stay sane in a world of way too much to do? So I invite you to send me questions. If you have questions as I'm talking, via Twitter using the hashtag ZBWebinar, and I'll make every effort to answer your questions after the presentation. So without further delay, let's get started. You know, stress-free productivity and getting things done, that all sounds kind of, sounds like a good thing to do, but about what? So I'd like to focus first of all on what are the kind of things that show up in our world that we do need to be productive about. And it seems that the world just doesn't necessarily show up in a pretty pink bow with a nice neat package, that it's kind of amorphous, and especially if you're building your own business and kind of starting from I need to make it up and make it happen, it's not necessarily that obvious to begin with. And over the years, we've discovered there are 6 key areas or horizons that we have commitments with ourselves. And this is true for everyone. Some people may be more or less conscious about these different horizons, but a quick view of what are all of our commitments, and one way to think about this would be, what are all the things you're committed to do? I use work, by the way, in a very universal sense. Anything you want to get done that's not done yet. So when we talk about getting things done, what would that be? Well, obviously that could be anything from buy cat food to fulfill your life purpose. So to make it a little bit more useful here, we found that these 6 horizons are very good to be aware of, to think about, well, what is my commitment at that level? And if we're going to be efficient and productive, being productive simply means producing something that you desire as an outcome. If you go on a vacation to be relaxed and to have fun, and you're stressed out and don't have fun, that's not a productive vacation. So productivity does not necessarily, it's not limited to just business and just work kind of things as we usually think about it. It really has to do with all of it. If you start at the top level here, you see on the slide, what I call the 50,000 level. That's the top level here. It's like, what are the things that really matter? That would be the purpose. And by the way, for any one of you, you can look at these horizons personally as well as organizationally for your company. For instance, the big question there would be, what's the purpose? Why do I exist? Why am I on the planet? And also, in terms of values, you could say principles, what really matters? What really, really matters to you? You don't care what kind of business you have or what you do, as long as what's true. And that would be for you personally, if you answered the questions at these levels, and that's what you're getting done. Like, how are you doing as a human being on the planet? If we apply this model to your business, then that's certainly the good business question of what business are you in? What's the purpose of your business? What would be off purpose for your business? And sometimes you will find out what those answers are by looking at, well, what would I not want to include here? And that may give you some directionality. So knowing your purpose of your business or your purpose of your life, as well as what are the core values in your business, is that going to help you decide which email you need to write first tonight, or what you need to talk to your staff about, or how to address a client? It'll help some. And certainly it'll create a ground for you to feel more comfortable in terms of what you're doing overall, but you're probably going to need to have a little more clarity about some of the other operational commitments that you have. If you drop it down to the next level, what I refer to as vision, that would be, well, what would it look, sound, or feel like if you were wildly successfully fulfilling your purpose as a company or as a person. You might think out long term, 3, 4, 5 years from now. What would you like to be when you grow up? What would your company like to be when it grows up? And a long picture out there. So that would be more of a specific kind of a thing. Well, we want to have this kind of influence. We want to be this size. We want to have this kind of profitability. We want to be doing this kind of service or reaching these kind of people. So that's where you're going to get more specific about fulfilling your purpose. A lot of very different companies can have the same purpose, but when you talk about what's the vision, much more specifically, what would that look, sound, or feel like? And if you've done some work on visioning that, then getting that done would certainly be a horizon that you'd want to focus on and be efficient about. Knowing what your vision is that going to help you decide which email to write first? Well, a little bit more, but you're still going to need to drop it down to another level of operational focus, and that's going to be, what do I need to accomplish? What are the goals and objectives? The things for the next, let's say, 3 to 24 months, say, that you're committed to finish or accomplish, which if I did that, those are the things that are going to help me, have the vision come into manifestation. And so, maybe that's the 4 or 5, 6 things you need to get done by the end of 2014. If you're doing typical kind of business planning on an annual basis, that's where this horizon would come to play. And that's certainly going to be more specific. Well, we need to get this accomplished by the end of that next year. We need to get this department set up. I need to make sure that this kind of training program is put into place. We need to make sure we've got this sales or CRM package set up and installed well. Those would be the kind of things that you're committed to do or finish or accomplish at that level. Then down below that, and below is not less, it just means that it's in a more operational level, more day-to-day, would be something that we call accountabilities. And those are the key areas of things you need to maintain. Now, a lot of your day is just maintaining. What are the things you need to maintain? Well, you need to answer the phone. You need to make sure your staff are okay and happy. You need to make sure your equipment works. You need to make sure that you eat lunch. So just across your business, you have areas of things. These are not things to finish. These are things you just need to maintain at certain levels of standards. Quality control, sales, finances, public relations, your marketing. So these are not things to finish. You never finish growing sales or pleasing customers. Those are just areas of focus that you often need to just maintain. Many times a lot of your day is spent just picking up the phone, handling people as they come to you, and dealing with things to maintain a certain level of quality and engagement with people at that level. And those certainly can include a lot of things that you need to get done just in the course of being able to maintain. But then you get down, by the way, we still haven't got anything to do yet. We're just talking about areas of that you're focused on and things you're committed to either maintain or to complete or accomplish, usually in a longer term or a sense of direction. But then you come down to what are all the things that you need to finish about all that? And that's what I refer to as projects. Now, I have a very broad, radical definition of a project. A project is anything you're committed to finish that'll take more than one action step to finish it that you can finish within a year. Now, there's a very specific reason we found to identify all of those things, because anything you're committed to finish within a year, and that could be a very small thing like get tires on your car, could be a very big thing like install a sales process, CRM process, or perhaps you want to acquire another business. Those kind of things would still be under the category that we would call projects. Those are things you can actually finish within a few days, weeks, or months. Most people, by the way, have quite a number of those. Most people in our experience have between 30 and 100 of those, if you include all the things in your personal life as well. And you still don't have anything to do until you get down to the most mundane or the most operational, the most day-to-day, minute-to-minute level of commitments of things to do and things to be efficient about. And that's the real actions that you really take. The physical, visible activity that you do. We refer to that as what's the next action. So if you were going to install a new sales process, what's your next action on doing that? If you were going to get a dog, what's your next action on doing that? The answer to that question, when you start to define what your work is at that level, down at that more mundane and operational level, that's the stuff that it's coming at us fast, it's changing rapidly, but that's actually where execution happens. Things don't happen up in the sky. You don't actually finish projects. You don't actually do goals or vision. What you do are emails and conversations and picking things up at the store and typing things into the computer. So all of life's work that we get done actually gets done at the physical operational level. But we found that all of these levels, obviously the ideal is for all of those to be in alignment. You want to make sure that the actions you're taking are finishing the projects you're committed to finish, about all the things that you're accountable to maintain, that are moving you toward the goals and things you need to accomplish, that when accomplished, those things will let your vision manifest, which is going to be fulfilling your purpose, and all of that within your core values and your core standards. Now, I just said a lot. That's an awful lot, and most people, I think, need a reminder that our lives are much more complex than most people stop and think about. And so when you see the material I'll be sharing with you here, it's going to have a lot to do with dealing with the complexity and the volume of these different levels of commitments that we have. Now, if you wanted to say, what's the best way to approach all of this? Well, how and when am I in that productive state? And we've just found that there is a state that everybody recognizes. You've all been here before. It's that time when you're really on. You may have different words that would describe this, but you probably had a time that you were working on a project, or you were in a situation, or just somehow you were engaged in life in something, being highly productive. You probably didn't even think of the word productive. You were just on. And the way we would describe that is you're in control. And when I use the word control, I'm not trying to mean like control your boss or your kids or the weather. Good luck. I'm talking about having something under control, like your car or a conversation or a meeting or your desk. So under control is what I'm talking about. In other words, you've got stability there. You're not, you're not slipping and falling or falling through a crack somehow. You've got some level of stability. You're also relaxed. And relaxed doesn't mean lazy or lethargic. If you're going to be an Olympic runner or sprinter, you're going to spend a lot of your training time relaxing. So relaxing is actually a critical element to actually doing high performance or being a high performer in any way. So that sort of sense of control, relaxed focus control, and focus is another key element. When you're really on, you're highly focused, you're not distracted, people can tell, hey, don't bother him, he is absolutely on, he's really focused on what he's doing. And also inspired, and I don't mean like giddy or tee-hee, ha-ha kind of inspired, I'm talking about time just disappearing. I'm sure you've all had one of those days where it's like, oh, lunchtime, gosh, where did the morning go? So when time disappears, you're then in that psychological state that athletes refer to as being in their zone. It's a very highly productive state, at least self-assessed. And you're also meaningfully engaged. You're getting things done. You're meaningfully engaged in whatever it is that you're working on. You're feeling good about it from a place of trust and not just hope. So again, you may have different words to describe this, but this is the best state to hit a golf ball from, the best state to do a business plan in, the best state if you've got a difficult conversation with a staff person you have to have. This is just the best state to be in. As a matter of fact, if you get in this state when time disappears, there is no difference between work or play. It's all really the same thing. And interestingly, you're as likely to feel this way and in this productive state as work as you are at home. So it's interesting, if this is the state you want to get into, how do we do that? Here's the problem or the challenge to this is people sometimes find themselves in this state but then fall out of it. They don't know what made them fall out of it, and then they don't know how to get back into it again. Have you ever fallen out of this state? I'm sure many of you, if you think about what would the opposite of this state be? Well, it'd be stressed out, unfocused, out of control, bored, and stuck. So if you ever tasted any part of that pie, you know what I'm talking about. Now, people say, well, should I always be in this productive state? Oh, heavens no. I mean, if you're not falling out of this state at least 6 times a day, you're probably not playing a big enough game. So it's not a matter of always being in this state. It's a matter of recognizing when I fall out of this productive state because of some new thing, some new input, some surprise, something unplanned happens. Then, wait a minute, I need to now get back on again. Do you know how to do that? And that's the guarantee I'm going to give you with what I'm sharing with you as best practices here. Because we've discovered over the years that there are very specific things you can do. That when you discover that I'm out of this state, I'm feeling stressed, or I'm feeling unfocused, or I'm feeling stuck, what are the real things I can do to get myself back on again? And that's the promise of this. And I discovered this too, and another part of what I would refer to as the productive state is something that I refer to these days as the strategic value of clear space. Clear space. I mean, it really helps when you have room to think. Most of the executives that I work with now, one-on-one, would give anything to be able to have an extra 2 hours a week, not for time, but to be able to think at some level of clarity in terms of strategy or creativity or innovative thinking. And it's really room, psychic room internally. In other words, What would you do if you had more space? If you could suddenly shut the world up in terms of all the noise, all the pull, all the distractions on you, and it was quiet, and you truly had room to think, what would you think about? Where would you put that? And there's got to be some motivation for you there, otherwise it may not be worth doing what you need to do to get to clear space. But clear space is a very, very important place. I got a black belt in karate in the martial arts many years ago, and I steal from the martial arts a really powerful idea. They refer to it as mind like water. And what does that mean? Well, like water responds to things around it totally appropriately. It doesn't overreact, it doesn't underreact, just an absolutely appropriate response to what's going on. Ready for the next thing. In other words, you throw in a pebble, it doesn't do boulder. You throw in a boulder, it doesn't get mad that you threw a big boulder into it. It just does that, and then it's back to calm and balanced again. But what does that mean? Well, I know a lot of people that take one meeting into the next emotionally, and I know an awful lot of people that take home to work and work to home. They're at work worrying about things in their personal life. They go home and then they're worried about stuff in their professional or their work world, and they're not making progress on either one. That's not mind like water. So how would you get there? Well, perhaps a more practical example of this would be, let's assume this is your kitchen, and let's assume you like to cook, and you've got guests and friends coming over for dinner in an hour or so. And let's assume that in this state, you also have all the tools you need and all the food you need for the prep, right? Well, if you start from a place like this kind of clear space, what does that give you as opportunities for the next 2 or 3 hours? Oh, well, very likely you're going to have a lot more opportunity to have fun, be spontaneous, be relaxed. You're going to actually have the ability to have a meaningful focus. I mean, you're inviting friends over for dinner. What should your focus be? Well, it should be on them. It should be in engaging with them, right? So this gives you the freedom to certainly be able to do that. And of course, you know where everybody hangs that hour before dinner. Yeah, this is the living room. And what happens if you've discovered that, hey, you're missing something, some ingredient? Oh, that's okay. We can do a workaround. Let's go use this instead. So a lot easier to be able to then fix things and course correct when you start from this situation. And probably most importantly in terms of productivity, especially in a small business, especially, in my experience of it, is I am the most productive when I have the freedom to really make a mess. I don't work neat, I don't cook neat. I make one mess at a time, but I don't work neat. I've got mind maps, I've got papers, I've got stuff on the computer, I've got stuff all over. And I think we need that. I think that that's when you are the most productive, is when you have the freedom to make mistakes, to expand, to express yourself, to let's go try this, let's push this open a little bit. And then, I can bring it back. But the freedom to make a creative mess, that's actually when you're going to be the most productive. But start here. Let's suppose it's 5 o'clock and they're coming at 6. Think about this. How much fun? How relaxed? What's your meaningful focus going to be here? Well, don't step on something, right? And how well can you fix anything when it all seems to be broken, right? And listen, folks, if you're already in a mess, you can't make one. So the question for you is, how many unprocessed emails do you have right now in your in-basket, in your email application? And is there any difference between that other than the subtlety and this? When you get a free 20 minutes this afternoon, or if you get some strange little window of time where you actually have the freedom to do some creative thinking, how free and clear is it in terms of your psyche if you've got a lot of unprocessed, unfinished, unclarified, unorganized things around you? So that's really the challenge here, is how do you do that? A way to bring that down home is, do you actually have anything on your mind right now? Aside from listening to me, I'd be willing to bet, those of you who've been listening and watching this webinar, that you've had at least one, if not several things pop into your head that had nothing to do with what I've been talking about since this started. Where did your mind go? Do you have anything on your mind aside from listening or watching me right now that you would consider important and strategic? Usually when I ask that in a seminar, because, oh yes, I've got important strategic things on my mind. Well, then I have the bad news, which is there's usually an inverse relationship between the amount that's on your mind and the amount that's getting done. See, there's a lot of important and strategic things in your life and work that are not on your mind right now. Why not? Because they are on cruise control. And what I mean by that is there's nothing that you're thinking needs to still be decided or done. It's already in motion, it's in process, and it's smooth in some way, shape, or form based upon your assessment of that. And the reason things are on your mind will be because there are either decisions about it that you haven't made that you need to make, or You haven't parked the results of that decision making with trusted systems or people that you can trust will look at the right thing at the right time. You don't actually have to finish those things to get them off your mind. But if they are still on your mind, it usually means that you're the bottleneck and it's hung up. It's actually not, you're not making progress on it. You're not getting things done. So I say all that because a number of these techniques that I'll be sharing with you have a lot to do with how do I get this stuff off my mind. It's really about being able to free up your attention. You want to put your attention on that new client that you just got. You want to put your attention on the new office that you're setting up. You want to put your attention on the business plan that you're writing. You want to put the attention on the meeting with the bank that you want to extend your credit line. Those are the kinds of things that you don't want your attention held hostage. You want the freedom to be able to do that. So getting control of your attention is one of the most powerful elements to getting things done. Here's the biggest issue that we have. People often ask, gee, David, what's new with all the new technologies and iPhones and iPads and electronic stuff and social media and all that stuff going on? And I say, well, there's nothing really new except how frequently it is. In the last 72 hours, I'll bet most of you, certainly I have, and I'll bet most of you watching this right now, have had more change-producing, project-creating, and priority-shifting inputs come into your world than your parents had in a month, maybe even a year. That's what's different, is how frequently things are new. I'll bet while you're even watching this webinar, when you go back to whatever you go back to, and by the way, it is mounting up while you're watching this, and some of you may be trying to multitask and watching that at the same time, looking at your email. It's piling up out there. And any one of those potentially meaningful inputs may then shift what you consider are your priorities this afternoon when you go back into your world out there. And a lot of you would be bored if you didn't have that kind of change and that kind of opportunity coming to you. But the problem is how do you relating to this? So with all of that input that is coming in and all that stuff we're having to deal with, what's your response? It could either be this, or the sort of flip side of this is crazy busy. Ever find yourself in crazy busy mode? Usually means you're feeling out of control and unfocused, and you're trying to get off your own back by just working harder. Or you're just turning to toast and burning out, maybe like this guy. Or you could be relating to it by what I refer to, and here's the picture I want to give you, an image. So here it comes on screen, folks, and that is knowledge worker ninja. Bring it on. Can't wait to see what's in my in basket. See, this creature is actually demonstrating something that the military trains even now their junior officers, is the primary productive state to be in if you're out there in the heat of battle, and that's situation awareness. That is, I need to have my awareness able to scan all over, up, down, sideways, in and out, be able to notice something coming from there and decide what it is quickly, decide what it means, where it goes, what to do with it. And you can't do that if you've clogged up with a lot of that other stuff. So this is the state that we're after, to be able to get there. And let me give you a fast forward right here, and let me give you the secret keys. And I'll unpack each one of these a little bit more in a little bit more detail for you. But let me give you the keys here right off. First of all, anything that potentially has your attention, that's potentially meaningful at all, you need to capture that. And capture it, meaning into some trusted place. And that's not your head. And sooner than later, you need to decide what are the outcomes and the action steps that I need to take. You need to decide what exactly does that mean to me, and what am I going to do about it, if anything. And then you need to make sure you organize the inventory of the results of that thinking. Here's the actions, here's the calls I need to make, here's the projects I need to keep track of. All those things need to be organized in an appropriate way so that you can step back and stage 4, review the inventory of all of your options and possibilities from a higher perspective. And then you need to keep all that current, so that you can then trust your intuitive judgments, that you're not missing anything, that you're seeing the whole game, that you've got the appropriate maps. So let me unpack those a little bit, each one of those. First of all, let's talk about capture. What does capture mean? Well, capture basically means to grab anything that has your attention and throw it into some bucket. When I say throw it into a bucket, it's like your in basket. Your in basket is the most important element. It's my most important tool. Now I have various tools that serve as an in basket where I just need to capture an idea. I don't know what I'm going to do with that idea yet, but it is potentially meaningful to me. I don't capture everything, but if it's notes in a meeting and I may then later on decide I need to do something about that or do something with that information, that's what I want to capture. Somebody gives me a good idea of something I might want to do, something I might want to consider later on. In other words, anything that you're not going to finish just by having the thought in the moment, or many times I'm just grazing in my mind. I'm just I'll think about that, and I'll think about that. But then if I think about something, oh, and I might want to put that on a blog, or, oh, I really might want to talk to my wife about that, or, that's something I really might want to then share with my clients, and I can't do it that very second, that's the kind of thing you need to get out of your head. If you don't do that, if you don't get it out of your head, what then happens is your head starts to keep track of all of that, and it does not do that very well. It's actually a very poor collection mechanism. So if I were to sit down with you one-on-one, desk side, which is what we do in our company a lot with executives and professionals and entrepreneurs and business owners, we sit down with them at their desk, and one of the first exercises we do is we truly empty out their head. Everything that's pulling on their attention, everything that's got them wrapped around it in some way, shape, or form. Little, big, personal, professional, does not matter. We get it all. That's a big list, by the way. And many of you, I'm sure, watching this have sat down and made lists before, but I'm talking about a real list. And not evaluating and not even doing anything with these or organizing these things or deciding anything about them yet. Just capturing them. By the way, guess how long it takes for the typical mid to senior level professional person that we work with to do that exercise? Just to gather together all the stuff that has their attention? 1 to 6 hours. Another thing that we do, by the way, oftentimes even before we get the stuff out of their head, we just look around their workspace and say, what doesn't belong here permanently? What in or around or on your desk or office or your work area is not supplies or reference material or decoration or equipment? Because anything that's not those 4 things does not belong there permanently, and therefore represents something that's in motion, in process, incomplete, not finished yet, still has some sort of end line or end game it needs to get to. So that's the easiest way to start to look around what's got your attention. Just look around and see what doesn't belong there. And so we just gather all that up and just throw that back in your own in basket, because you need to then make some decisions about that and get that under control. It's pulling you out of control unless you start to handle that really well. But that 1 to 6 hour event, and that's not something you can certainly do here in a webinar, but one of the takeaways might be for you as soon as you can, if you have not done this recently, is to get some quiet time and get yourself a pad and a pen and unload every single thing. Again, little, big, personal, professional, any and all of that. Get it out of your head. Now, in each one of these stages, I'm going to give you the best and worst practices and the tools and techniques. Because this is not about simply getting organized. A lot of people think, well, I need to go get more productive and efficient, so let me go get organized. You'll see organize is an important component, but it's only one. And there are other things that need to happen. As a matter of fact, there are 2 stages that need to happen first before you actually have the contents of what you need to organize. The first stage, as I've just indicated, is to capture. Best practice there is to have any meaningful thought or input or thing to do, any would, could, should, need to, ought to, might want to, get those out of your head. Simply stated, write it down. Now, of course, you can call your own answer machine and leave yourself a message. You can text yourself a note into your own email. However you do it, there are a lot of ways you can use the technology to do that, but mainly you need to get it into some trusted place. The worst practice is to leave it in your head, because that part of your psyche that starts to hang on to these things, if that's the only place you're trying to track these, it has no sense of past or future. It has no sense of a good map of orientation. It'll make cat food as important as your strategic plan and wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and beat you bloody about it with no perspective at all. Your mind actually doesn't have one. It's kind of a dumb terminal. Your intelligence is what controls your mind, but the mind itself is a really bad tool. It's really for having ideas and not for holding them. And so if you're using your psyche for remembering and reminding, you'll be remembering and reminding based upon the latest and loudest things in your life, not based upon what's really important and strategic and meaningful. So your head is just not the place to do this, folks. So you need to make sure you get it out of your head. Now, if you're going to buy into that idea, if you agree with me about that, then you're going to need the tools, which are the collection devices. And there are lots of collection devices that you can use. You can use, I use my in-tray. I carry a little pocket notebook. That's probably most of my life started as a dumb idea or a crazy idea, or I don't know what I'm going to do with that idea, but I just wrote it down. So I have a pen, and this goes with me everywhere. My driver's license and credit cards go with me. So this is a ubiquitous capture tool. I'm grabbing stuff all over. Yeah, I got 3 pages here the last 12 hours or so. And these then will go into my physical in basket. And those things that's how I capture stuff. I don't know what to do with these yet. I don't need to, but I do need to decide sooner than later. Now, if you stop there, and a lot of people do. Now, a lot of people catch that best practice And they'll feel better and sleep better if you just keep a pad and pen by your bed so you grab those ideas and don't wake up in the morning with them, or have them wake you up. So just being able to write more down and capture more things, it will help and improve your condition and increase your productivity to some degree. But if you stop there, now you become a compulsive list maker. Now you've got Post-its stuck all over your screen, and you got things you're writing all over the world, and that won't help either, because that stuff will start to suck back up into your head if some part of you doesn't trust you're going to get to those things sooner than later and decide exactly what those things mean. You'll notice I had 3 pages, but only 3 pages in that little pad. That's why spiral notebooks are dangerous, because people take notes and then turn those pages and then don't process. That is, they don't move to the next stage. The next stage is, I need to now clarify what this stuff means. So once I've written down these notes, and by the way, your email, everything that's piling up in your email represents something in your in-basket. It's in your email in-basket, but those things need to be clarified just like everything else. The clarification process says, okay, what am I going to do about the bank? What's the specific thing? What am I going to do about the doctor? So now that's where you have to decide, I now need to transform this stuff from just a captured note into real things. So I have a technical term there called stuff. My definition of stuff is anything that's landed in your world physically or psychologically that doesn't belong there permanently. You just haven't decided exactly what it means or what you're going to do about it yet. So stuff. People often ask me, gee, David, is this somebody's real office? And my joking answer to that is no, it's the x-ray of somebody's head who has a clean desk. So those of you who are sitting here smug and think, well, I have a nice clean desk, you're harder for us to coach than these people, because you got it all constipated up in your head. It's going to take longer to unravel all your psychic spaghetti, at least these piles that will have crude placeholders we can start with in terms of what it means. Neither one of which is a best practice, trust me. Those things need to be then clarified. Now you might say, well, gee, David, that was the paper world, that's the old world. Well, welcome to the new world. Think this is any different? As a matter of fact, the new world is even more insidious, because it now has computer and electronic stuff with stuff inside them you can't see, because that stuff goes off screen. And if it's still stuff in there, there are things you've collected in any of those places that you still have something you might need to decide or do about it, then in a way, this is even worse. In a more subtle vein, I'm sure many of you have things that you would call to-do lists, but in a more subtle vein, most to-do lists are simply things that have been collected in an in-basket but still need more clarity. Oftentimes, this is what to-do lists look like. You'll see on here, mom. Well, good. That's probably good historical data. I'm sure you had one. Why did you put it on your to-do list? Well, it's her birthday. There's actually something about that. By the way, every single thing on any one of your lists is either attracting or repulsing you psychologically. There's no neutral territory, folks. You're either going, woo, when can I mark that off? Or, get out of my face, because there's still decisions about you haven't made and thinking that's required about this, and I don't have the energy to think and decide right now. Stop reminding me I'm overwhelmed. And that's why most people's planners and to-do lists actually create fatigue when people engage with them, because what they're really reminding themselves of are decisions still unmade. What are you going to do about mom and her birthday? What are you going to do about the bank? What are you going to do about the doctor? What are you going to do about the ad campaign? Most to-do lists, I'd say 99% of every to-do list I've ever seen when I sat down to work with someone, is nothing but an incomplete list of still unclear stuff. So this still needs to be taken to a next stage. And that next stage would be, well, what do I need to ask myself about any one of these things? What attention do I still need to put on them? The funny paradox here is that things have your attention because you haven't put the right attention on them. And if you absolutely want to be able to get your attention off something, you need to put attention on it and pay appropriate attention to it. Then it shuts up. What do I mean by that? Well, what question do you need to ask yourself about mom or the bank or the doctor? Very first question you need to ask about mom and birthday is, are you actually going to do anything about it? Are you actually going to do anything about the doctor? Are you going to do anything about the bank? There's a first key question. I know these are simple little questions, but boy, I can't tell you how many very sophisticated people sit and avoid just the basics to determine, wait a minute, is this an actionable item? And by the way, there are 2 optional answers to this question. Hang on. It's going to be this deep and technical. Watch. Yes and no. I know. Stick with me. Now, that question, you going to do anything about mom's birthday or not? Yes or no. Maybe is no, by the way. And you'll see that even when you say there's nothing to do about these notes that I took, these meeting notes or these emails, and by the way, processing your emails is exactly the questions you need to ask about what they are. You get a lot of things that are no. No, there's no action on that. But you still have to decide whether it's something that you need to delete or recycle or shred or whatever. Didn't need it, or now that I've seen it, I don't need it. It might be something that has no action now, but it might later. So you might say, Mom's birthday's not for a couple of months. I got a lot of other pending things. Let me check in about a month. They'll give me time to decide what I need to decide. So then you need to build some trigger in that'll let you reassess these things in some future state. And that's, by the way, a good executive thing to do. Many of you in your businesses, sometimes it's not time to make a decision and you want to wait till the last responsible moment to make the judgment call, because you might be getting more valuable and other input that would change the nature of what you decide. So fine to decide, not to decide. Just need to make sure that you get clear that that's what that category is. And then there are a lot of things that you get that you have no action on, but you need to keep it, especially a lot of emails you need to keep track of. Things by theme, topic, or person, or project, or somebody recommends a restaurant you might want to go to at some point, or there's a lot of versions of reference. That is things that there's no action now, but I want to have that data accessible to me when the time comes when I might need it. Now, a lot of things, and many of the things on your to-do list that you have, would fall into the actionable category. Yes, I am going to do something about Mom's birthday. Well, there are two key questions that must be answered in either order, but both of these questions really need to be answered to be productive, to be efficient, and to get things done. You need to determine what outcome, if any, am I committed to finish about this. Now, are you committed to giving Mom a birthday party? Yes, I am. Now you've got a project. Give Mom birthday party. Terrific. The other key question, this has become so critical to get things done, is what's the very next action step you need to take on the birthday party? You're going to call your sister, you're going to surf the web, you're going to go talk to your mom. What's next? What's the very next thing you need to do? So here's a master key, folks, about getting things done. There are two things you got to get clear about. First of all, what does done mean? And what does doing look like, and where does it happen? So outcome and action are going to become the zeros and ones, if they're not already, for your businesses, for your meetings. Meetings should be, what are we trying to accomplish by what time? You don't end discussions without saying, so what's the next step, yours or mine? Now, many of you know these and probably are already doing these intuitively. I'm just making this explicit, what it is that really works to be able to move the needle on things and get off the dime if you're going to move something forward. So big key questions you need to ask. And if you look at your to-do list, most of you on your to-do list or your task list, wherever you're keeping that, do not have either or both of these answered. You have something like mom or doctor or whatever, understood that you know there's something you need to do about it. But these and answering these questions very specifically are going to get you a lot more discreet and take it out of the nature of stuff and actually make it something that's manageable. So in other words, you're going to take your to-do list that's going to look like that, and you're going to then put it into something like that, where, okay, now I've got very clear projects, I've got very clear outcomes, and very clear action steps about it. So this is what we do. We've spent thousands of hours doing that kind of stuff with thousands of people out there. And I can tell you, these questions look simple, and this looks like a simple translation or migration, and maybe not a big change, but it's huge. To be able to get an outcome list that's very specifically and clear and accurate and current, and to be able to then have a map of all the next actions you need to about all of those things. And again, most of you have between 30 and 100 projects if you take that broad definition, and most of you have over 150 next actions if you really got the inventory out of your head and got it really complete. Best practice here is to make these decisions when things show up. Worst practice is wait till it blows up to decide the next step on the bank, the doctor, mom's birthday, or whatever. You'll decide action items on a lot of these things, but most people wait until the heat forces them to make those decisions, and then it becomes latest and loudest, knee-jerking, no fun, ulcer production, as opposed to, let me just get the inventory of all the work to do so that I can then be on top of it and really keep my hand on the helm with that instead of feel like I'm being driven by the storm. The only tool you really have to support that, folks, is your frontal cortex. You got to think. No software, no application, no planner is going to tell you what your next step is on mom's birthday or the doctor or the bank. You have to do that. You have to make the decision, and that's the thought process. People have called our work knowledge work athletics. It's a very good description. So it's the moves you need to make in order to be a knowledge worker. So now once you've clarified it, it'll still back up in your head if you don't organize the results of that stuff in some appropriate places. And organize just quite simply means, look, put stuff where it needs to go, where it's accessible. A very simple way to think about this is organized really means that where something is, visually or physically, represents what it means to you. In other words, if I have something I need to do, like a phone call, I need to park that somewhere where those are phone calls to make. And I don't blend that with other things. So when I look at that category, I know, oh, that's a phone call I need to make. If I've got reference material somewhere where reference material doesn't belong, I'm disorganized, not because I said so, just by definition. So it begs the question of the first two phases. I need to clarify what are the outcomes, what is an actionable item and not. But once I do that, now I've got a good criterion to use to set up some organizational categories, which don't have to be that complex. You just need to make sure you've set it up based upon what it means. And in a lot of our materials in my book, I go into more detail about what are some of the best practices, but quite simply, there are a few lists, and I'll share a couple with you, that are just the major ones to get right. You need tools for that. You just need a list manager for the most part. And that could be file folders with pieces of paper inside of them. It could be a planner, loose leaf planner with pages that you can use to make lists on the separate pages. Or it could be any one of the thousands of software applications out there now that have the way for you to be able to make a list of tasks or action items. I would just make sure you've got one that's more than just one list. You want to be able to create different categories of lists. And you do need files, both digital and paper-based files, to keep collateral material for many of those actions and many of those things that you do need to organize. And all of that, of course, dies a sure death if you don't step back and review these things on some consistent basis. And review simply means I need to step back and take a look at these maps. What you're doing by capturing and clarifying and organizing the things that have your attention, as I've so described it, you start to then build what I call orientation maps. Here's my map for the day. I want to see my calendar. Show me where I need to be when. What's the hard landscape? What'll die if I don't do it? But if I get some discretionary time, show me a map of all the other things I could be doing, the phone calls I could be making, the things I could be doing on the computer, the errands I could be running. I also need to see a map and step back and say, what are all the projects I need to keep moving on until they get closure? You probably also need a map of your business plan or your strategy. You need a map for your family. What are the things I want to take care of? What are the things I want to watch? And what are the things I need to look at? So what we've discovered is as you start to get a lot of these things out of your head, all these different horizons of commitments that we have, and you start to identify those and become more objective about the contents there, then it becomes very elegant to step back and to be able to then look at these and see from a larger perspective. In other words, what you're really doing is looking through the whole, and that means the HOL as well as the WHOLE. So I need to look through the whole game. This is forest management instead of hugging the trees. So that's the master key to being able to do that. These are the different kind of reviews you want to set up. You want to be able to step back and review, hey, are we on purpose? Are our core values being held intact? You want to step back and look, hey, are we on track to the vision, or do we need to recalibrate the vision? How are we doing about our longer term plans and our shorter term plans? How are we doing about our job descriptions and our org chart and making sure that we're maintaining all the things that we need to maintain? Are we looking at all the projects that we've got going on out there, and we're making the distinctions about which ones are really hot, which ones are not, which ones we need to stop doing, which new ones we need to add in? And do we have all the right actions, all the right people doing all the right action steps? So these are the different kinds of things to review. I couldn't get it any simpler than this. You really need all of them. You certainly don't need to do them all every hour, every day. Heavens no. The more mundane, the calendar and your action list need to be seen probably several times a day. Your projects probably need to be reviewed at least once a week. And these upper horizons just need to be reviewed as often as you need to get them off your mind and to make sure that the more operational parts of your life are set up and on cruise control. So regular reviewing, is just necessary at different parts of the time to make sure you're playing the right games. And the tools for that are these kinds of lists. It's hard to do these kinds of reviews if you don't have something out in front of you to remind you of your strategic plan. Your psyche just does not put all that together very well. So making sure you've got some externalized views, that's what you want to do. And then you need to stay current with all this stuff. And staying current just means I need to keep bringing up the rear guard on some regular basis, reviewing all of my stuff, getting it fresh, getting it current. So instant work-life sanity would look like what? Well, you need to get some action lists. You need to create agendas list and waiting for lists. Those of you running your own businesses, those are critical lists. The agendas is what are the things I need to talk to people about, because that's how you're going to get a lot of work done. And what are the things I'm waiting on to come back from other people? What are the projects that I have? That's such a critical list to have. And what a lot of people get once they start to do this work is the 2-minute rule. By the way, once you decide a next action and you can do it in 2 minutes, you need to just do it right then. But learning to make decisions right off when you come back from those meetings, when you gather your notes, when you're looking at email, don't avoid the decision about what next actions are. And that's something people can get doing regularly. You also are going to need to give yourself time during every day to be doing regular processing. It takes time to do this. You're not gonna, it doesn't happen by itself, and it actually is part of your work because it's about defining your work. And you need to build in some regular review time for reflection. And integrating life and work, so you don't say, well, that's one and that's the other, but you start to see the whole mix is what's going to give you balance and have a lot better way to be able to coordinate and manage all of these things together and make some good hard decisions sometimes about what not to do as well as what to do. So again, these are the master keys about how you get control, get relaxed, get focused, be able to come back on when you fall off, I absolutely guarantee, but now you'll have a systematic way to get there in case you find yourself falling off of it. So again, this is the strategic value of clear space, and the real question is, what can you do to get more of it? Out of anything I've said, if you could get 1 or 2 or 3 takeaways from just what I may have reminded you about during the webinar, what would that be? So we're going to take an opportunity for a few minutes here for any of you who may have had some questions as I was going through this, and I'll do my best to answer them or certainly get to them as soon as I could. I have a question from Jason. What all sorts of apps and mobile technology can you efficiently capture that has your attention in a way that makes sense? Boy, there's a million out there. Almost anything that you can capture either by voice or typing into it fast. And again, part of it is your facility with how well you use technology. If you're afraid of all that stuff, don't bother with it. There's no better tool for capturing than pen and paper. No faster or more ubiquitous way to be able to do that. So you've got to be able to have a ubiquitous capture tool like that. But you can add more elegant technology into it as well. These days, the iPhone and the Android too have some voice recognition things that allow you to drop stuff in there. That's dangerous territory. If you're really good with it and you have the discipline to be able to pull these things back, then okay, that's fine, but out of sight, out of mind. And the problem is a lot of people dump stuff into these technological tools, but don't have the rigor to pull them back out. That's why I like to write notes physically and throw those notes into my physical in basket, because then it's in my face. That's a lot safer. And it's also more universal. I don't have to bother carrying gear with me. But it's okay and fine to use the gear as long as you set up very pristine areas within your computers or your tablets or your smartphones that you say, that's just a collection place, and you make sure you empty those regularly. If you have those best practices, any of those things can work. I've got a service that I call an 800 number and just leave a message, and it's typed and it's transcribed and back in my email within about 5 minutes. So that's really nice to use if I'm really on the run out there and don't have time to even write something down. I don't use that very often, but you can use the technology as long as I say, as long as you've got the discipline to really make those work. Another question from Ryan. What is your main processing hub? Do I use a laptop, a tablet, a smartphone? How does that hub assist in streamlining processing and reviewing? Well, me personally, I use a laptop. That's my primary workstation. I move around a lot. I've been on the road 200 days a year for 30 years. So I'm a very, very mobile person. So my office, I can be as productive anywhere that I've got a briefcase. And many times I am, airline clubs or waiting for meetings to start or whatever. And I actually have a tablet, I have a smartphone, and I have a laptop, and they all sync together. A lot of the reference material more than anything else. The list management and the list of my projects and working off the list, primarily my hub is my laptop, because I usually don't like to do any of that work unless I have all the tools of the laptop, because oftentimes a lot of things are connected to the web and I want to be able to have a good connection and I want to have good real estate on the screen. It's hard to do work on a smartphone, believe me. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having lists on there as reminders, and certainly having reference material like your telephone and address available to you whenever you need to do that. The tablet still is just an entertainment device and a diversion device to me. It's where I read my newspaper, that's where I read my magazines, and that's great because it's backlit, so I don't have to worry about the lighting anywhere. But it's mostly a consumption tool for me right now. All of those are kind of progressing slowly in terms of what we need to do, but again, the thought process is really required. A lot of people say, give me the computer to organize my life, and I say, good luck. You add any of those technology things into your life and you don't have this thought process or this best practice in terms of productivity set in place, all it's going to do is add more confusion and more overwhelm to you. So you really need to be able to do this in a low-tech, simple way, and then you can start adding, adding that into the technology. Now that said, I like cool gear. I love stuff that looks great, in terms of, and that's fun to play with. So sometimes, that's easy. It makes it more motivating for me to actually work my list and stay engaged with it if the gear itself is kind of tool and fun to use. So, but a lot of that's very personal preference. But that's how I work my system. From Erica, what business software products do you suggest for small business owners to help them capture information? Well, in terms of the capturing information itself, there's no, there's really nothing as an enterprise application that's specifically designed just for capture. What you have to do is, if you're using something like Microsoft Outlook, or if you're using things like Gmail folders, or using the Google Docs in terms of how you're managing your small business, or I use Lotus Notes. Again, it's a pretty sophisticated application, much like Microsoft Outlook. And there's several of those kinds of things out there, and within those applications you can find some place that's just a generic dump spot where you can just go dump things in until you can get back to it. I wouldn't necessarily trust those that much. You need to find a very specific place, and you can do it, a lot of people will do that by dumping things into their task in Outlook without a category on them. And that might be there, okay, these are the things I still need to process, these are still things that I need to capture. If I were you, I would say that it's a very individual thing, because you're going to need different kind of capture modalities. You're going to need things that, if you're out buying food at the store and think of something to bring up at the business meeting, you're going to need some place to write that down. So 3x5 cards, or little notepads you carry with you like I do, legal pads. Those are way, way the best tools to use. And I haven't seen one that's necessarily enterprise-wise, because you don't really need to share that with anybody. That's just your own personal thing. So any kind of digital place you can dump stuff in. I know some people that just use Microsoft Word. It's just a word processor, and they just throw stuff in there, and they may print it out later on to then process it, or just pull up the file and then go through it. But again, dangerous territory unless you really have the discipline of doing this already, because it'll be out of sight, out of mind if you tuck it inside the technology. Next question from Christy. I get a lot of emails every day. What's the best system for organizing them so I can handle the most important ones first? Well, I'm going to give you a radical approach to dealing with email. Is deal with it just like you deal with your physical mailbox at your house. Empty it regularly. Then this won't be an issue. A lot of people are using email as a way to try to keep organized, and to try to use their in-basket in their email as a way to stay organized, and there's no light at the end of that tunnel. If you could keep it below a screenful, I say sure. Then you could still glance at it real quick and see what's hot, what's not, what's critical, which ones you need to do. But as soon as you've got a lot more than that, and believe me, we have seen people with thousands, and then you're going to start to live in emergency scan mode. And there is no health in that. Emergency scan, I'm always checking, I'm always checking, I'm always checking. That's why people are always on their phones, always on that. I don't do any of that. Why? I zero this all out every 24 to 48 hours, sometimes 72 if I'm really on a roll doing other things. But because it's zeroed out on a regular basis, people can get me in an emergency if they need. I don't need to keep checking in on that. And so what you want to get away from is the constant, I need to keep checking, keep checking. There's nothing wrong with that if you're living in a kind of world where a lot of that data is coming across fairly regularly. But you shouldn't feel like it owns you. You need to own it. And the way to own it is to make sure that on some consistent basis you're zeroing out all of those inputs back to no backlog. Then the stuff that comes in, I get 100, 200 emails a day sometimes easily. And it takes an hour or so a day sometimes in between the lines. When I'm not doing anything else, I'm cleaning up because there's new stuff coming toward me I can't see. I want to keep that backlog as small as possible. It's a lot more efficient, a lot easier to get stuff done, the more minimal your backlog is of still unprocessed things. That said, if you're doing an emergency scan, specifically to this question, and say, hey, I'm going to walk in my email, sort by who they're from. Or sort by date. Sometimes LIFO, last in, first out, is the best way to see them because of all the discussion threads that tie onto those things. And so you're a little more efficient if you can start with the last. But I would only do that if you're going to get through to all of them by some point by the end of the day anyway. And that's my big suggestion. I know it's radical. I know a lot of people are going, oh God, I could never do that. But believe me, a zeroed out in-basket is just as critical as having a zeroed out head or kitchen before you're going to start to clean, cook dinner for people. So that's my big recommendation. Let's see, from Twitter, we got, how long does it usually take for this new way of doing things to become a habit? Kind of depends on how close you are to the habit to begin with. But this is not to discourage anybody, but let me let you know that to really embody these, and there's several stages of embodying what I've talked about. First of all, there's information, which I just gave you some information. Then there's instruction, called let me to follow the directions David said. And then there's installation, which means I now need to go set up some list and put some content in it. And then there's implementation, where you actually start using a calls list and using an agenda and a waiting for list. And then there comes the point where you feel uncomfortable keeping anything in your head. and you absolutely clean house, clean up your email, do a regular weekly review of all of your stuff and keep all of this externalized and keep it current and fresh and clean out from you, that usually takes 2 years to embody that habit so it becomes that much of a habit. Now, I say don't let that discourage you, because right away, just doing anything that I just suggested is going to make things feel better. You'll feel more controlled and more focused. Just getting stuff out of your head, if you do nothing more than that, it will get you there. So anything you do relative to these things is going to improve. But to answer this question quite specifically, if you say, how long till this is really just embodied, so I don't have to think about it anymore. You just sort of automatically do it, but just like you take showers and brush teeth. That's how I do it, but that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. Last question from Sylvia. Is there a best way to prioritize family obligations versus work duties? Get them all out in front of you. That's the best way to do it. And then, to make sure that you're at least on a weekly basis sitting down and saying, okay, here's my personal life, here's a map for all of that, all those projects, here's all the other projects that I'm doing. How's it going? Because the only thing you're really going to trust is your intuition or your heart or your spirit or your gut or whatever you want to call that sort of inner voice that you have that can step back when you take a look. It makes it a lot easier to start to make some of those determinations. Also, at a larger scale, to go back up these horizons and say, well, where are you going in your life? How is your lifestyle? How is career and lifestyle, and where are you going? Is the direction fine? Is that going okay? Or do you need really more balance in your life, more creativity, more whatever? So stepping back and having some of these higher level and more subtle conversations with yourself and perhaps with other key people in your life, that will also help galvanize some of these decisions you might need to make once you step back and see the map of all the things you've committed to. Okay, well, we've run out of time. We've come to that. And just in closing, let me say, hopefully this was useful to you. Again, to a large degree, I'm sure it was just reminders of things that many of you do intuitively anyway. A lot of my work has just been to make the implicit things we do work, make them explicit. And on behalf of ZionsBankBlog.com and ZionsBank, I do want to thank you for giving me the opportunity. If you've listened, and you paying attention is, of course, it's probably the most valuable thing you have. So if you've done that, special thanks to you, and special thanks to all the folks who've put this together. If you want to see the webinar again or invite others to see it, recorded version of this will be available within 48 hours on the ZionsBankBlog.com. So have a great rest of your life, folks. Thanks.